Hello. Oh, hi. Hi, guys. Thank you all for coming out here. It's a large audience. Thank you for just a fireside chat. We're going to have two fireside chats, or two sessions with fireside chats this afternoon. First of all, I'm Werner Vogels. I'm the CTO of Amazon.com, but probably you already knew that. So we're going to first have 3 great conversations with founders of startup companies. Fortunately, all 3 of them are technologists as well. So we get a chance to not only talk about sort of founding businesses, but maybe also talking a bit about founding as a technologist. Yeah? And so that would be fun. And then after this, there's a session, what they call CTO to CTO conversations, which are probably going to be sort of similar to this, but maybe a bit more deeper on the technical side. And then after that, we have a very exciting session where we are going to launch 5 companies here on stage, brand new companies that are going to be launched here. So hang around. After that, there will be happy hour here. So we'll have fun today. Also, I'd like to do a shout out to the folks at the AWS Loft. Where's the camera? Over there. It's in San Francisco. This is a loft that we've created there for startups, mainly for startups, to actually come in and get architectural advice if they want to. If you're, we're going to try and replicate this probably to other cities as well. So if you hear about an AWS Loft in your, let's say, neighborhood, it's something where you can always drop in to either get training or to get architectural advice, things like that. As first, I would like to invite on stage Adam Jacobs, the co-founder and CTO of Chef. Ellen. Hi. Thank you. Please sit. Have a seat.
Thank you.
Probably your biggest achievement, or that you're really best known for, is that you were a Puppet user, but
yeah. I hope that's not what I'm. I hope that's not what I'm best known for.
No, okay. Creating ops code originally, yeah. And so tell us, maybe for those of you in the audience that you don't know what you guys do.
Sure.
Give me a 30-second introduction.
Yeah, so Chef is a systems automation platform, right? So you write code to describe how you want your systems to be built. Then there's a little agent that runs on those systems and looks at them and says, are they what you said you wanted? And then as you change that code, it'll change the way the systems work, right? So that's Chef in a super nutshell.
Okay. Chef comes with cookbooks.
Yep, Chef comes with cookbooks. Yeah, the metaphor super resonates, right?
Okay, good.
Yeah, yeah. Like it's cute, right? You write recipes and they package them up in cookbooks, and then you can deploy those cookbooks, and there's, yeah.
Okay. Some of the things in your company has always been described as infrastructure as code. So can you tell me what you guys mean by that?
Yeah, so I think infrastructure as code is this idea that at the high level, as we've moved faster, right? So EC2 feels like it was this turning point where all of a sudden provisioning went from like weeks or months, and all of a sudden we could have it in minutes. And it was like a toothpaste tube got squeezed, and all of a sudden everything else sucked. Like even if you were really awesome at it, you were really bad, like an hour later. And so part of what reacted to that, for me anyway, was that we had to figure out a way to be able to describe the rest of our infrastructure, all the other stuff we had to do that was after provisioning, and it had to be as good and as fast and as agile as EC2 was, because otherwise you were just going to look at it and barf, and like it wouldn't be cool ever again. And so infrastructure as code is really that idea that everything you're going to do at some point is really, in the end, going to wind up being source code. And it doesn't really matter if it's infrastructure stuff, if it's application code, if it's network plumbing, whatever it's going to be, it's going to be source code. And you're going to describe that infrastructure and its condition as source. Okay.
So given that we have a founder's angle to this talk here, so when you guys started Chef, or I think Upscode is what it was
originally it was named Upscode.
Oh, Upscode, yeah. And so Chef was already existing before that? Were you doing
sort
it?
of.
Was it really the company that created the product?
Yeah, so I had a consulting company, and what we did was infrastructure automation. So if you were a startup, you could pay me a flat fee, like 30 or 40 grand, and I would fully automate your infrastructure from soup to nuts. It was provisioning, monitoring, trending, identity management, code deployment, all of it, right? Okay. Which was a good deal, and people dug it. And we sold like 15 of them in a year, and then we took a maintenance fee like a lawyer. So basically we were on retainer to like be your sysadmins. And that was cool, except it was brutal. So to be honest, like managing it was really bad, because the abstraction between, it was okay to implement technology for one business. And like for that one company, we could get it working pretty good. But then when you tried to abstract the details between the two, all that ever mattered were the details, right? Like, nobody cared about like that you could install MySQL fast. They cared that that one setting that they cared about was right. That was the part that made their stuff work. And so figuring out how to model that problem, that's what led us to write Chef. So my consulting company, basically we either needed to go get jobs because it was brutal and it wasn't fun anymore and it was super hard, or we needed to figure out a better abstraction to figure out how we could manage all these very different infrastructures. And when you think about that in the context of like the enterprise and the bigger shift that's happening, that really resonated because it's a very similar problem. You've got hundreds or thousands of different applications developed over 10 or 20 years that operate in super different ways. And how do you build a platform that can accommodate all of those things? And so that's really how Chef was born.
Okay, and so, but going from that to actually founding a company that then actually is going to do that, because at the same time you made the decision to make Chef open source.
Yep. So I am an open source person. So like I'm a Linux administrator really. So like I play a CTO on TV, but like I'm a systems administrator, right? Okay. Anything else I tell you is puffery. I think the real story there is that Jesse Robbins, who former master of disaster at Amazon.com, and familiar with you, and a few other folks from Amazon, so Chris Brown and a few other people. When I showed them Chef, it was really Jesse that was like, dude, this is a product. Like we can build a company that like changes the world based on what you're doing. And so it took a lot of people, the co-founders I was already with. It took the addition of Jesse and a few others. And then we went out and raised money on the idea that this idea of infrastructure as code and infrastructure automation was a requirement for sort of this emerging economy, which I think turned out to be right. It was a good bet. Okay.
So to make money in that world, so you both focus on the startup world as well as on the enterprise world. So how do you build exactly the same product for both worlds, or is there a different product that goes to the enterprise versus sort of the startup world?
Yeah, that's a good question. You build for one, so the enterprise wants the startup world. It's not the other way around. So like there's no startup person who sits there and they're like, hey, you know what we need? More enterprise software. Like has anybody ever done that? No. So the answer is no. So you really do build one product. When you think about how you bring it to market though, what you're bringing to market is really people successfully navigating the transition, right? Like what I sell, yes, I sell Chef, and it's open source, and like I sell some premium features, and all that stuff is true. But the real thing we sell is that we help people get to the place they need to be, which is high velocity, high safety, delivering customer value multiple times a day. Like we help people navigate that transition better than anybody else does. And that's because we live that transition ourselves, and our software was designed to do it. And we've seen so many people go through that transition that we can help you avoid a bunch of pitfalls and many other things. And so, it's the software we sell, and it's also the relationship we build and the problem we solve. And if the problem you're solving is whether people are successful, that tends to weather sort of any technology change or any weird drift. Like making GE successful or making Facebook successful or making a small startup successful, it's the same. The only difference is scope.
Okay. So, but except for that, startups actually have the luxury of starting from scratch, where probably when you come into the enterprise, that's a very different story.
Yeah, I think that's true, but even in the enterprise, right? If the problem you're facing is transformational, and I would argue that the problem facing the enterprise now is, right? If you look at the people who are on stage talking about how they've moved all into AWS, that is a transformational thing. They are not the same company than they were before. Yep. And that transition is so fundamental. It changes everything. It doesn't change our technology. It's the way the business ownership works. It's the way that you communicate with each other. It's your development process. Everything changes. And when it's that fundamentally different, the reality is the enterprise gets to start new too. And that doesn't mean they abandon the legacy, but they start fresh on learning how to operate that way, right? And the difference is that they have a model that works now that's already $1 trillion company. So they already have a working model of how to be successful. Now they have to figure out how to do what they do that makes them successful, only do it like 1,000 times faster. Okay. So they too kind of have the luxury of being a startup in that way. Their constraint is very different, right? Their product market fit already exists. So it's not like they're wondering, will someone buy my product? They know people will buy it. They're $1 trillion company. Buying product solves problem. Yep. But from a technology point of view, it's pretty similar.
Okay. Although, push on this.
Yeah, please do. That's why it's a conversation as opposed to something else. Yeah.
So it's often in a startup, you always wear multiple hats.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're and the salesperson and the CEO, or you're and the CTO, or you're developer and the ops guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, DevOps is, in my eyes, a natural process within startups because you have to have multiple hats.
Yeah, sure.
As any role. Enterprises often traditionally these roles have been separated.
Yes.
So how much education do you need to do in the enterprise? And do they come to you and basically ask you, teach me DevOps?
Well, yeah, sure they do. I think, but then you sort of have to reframe the question, which is why? So like, what is the thing you're trying to solve for? Because you're not solving for DevOps, right? Like that's weird. But you probably are solving for the fact that like, you know, let's take Amazon's retail business. Anybody who does retail is competing with you and they're losing. And that's a bummer. And so like in order to compete to them, it's great for you. But like, right? But in order to actually be successful, like they're going to have to accelerate to at least be able to pretend they can compete with you on the level of software delivery, right? And so to do that, there's this natural transition as the velocity of what you're doing increases, where the individual people who are involved in this decision-making process, they have more autonomy and they have some more authority, and the way you think about controls changes. So a good example there where I really felt like I understood it was Facebook, where I had the opportunity and the honor to help them build their config management system. And we installed our software, and we had to make a change to Facebook, the website, in order for our software to run on their internal network. And I'd been there like 3 hours, and the guys that were with me were like, hey, here's what you're going to do. You're going to check out Facebook onto your laptop, and then you're going to propose this change, and then your software will work. And I was like, what? I'm going to do what? And they were like, you're going to check out Facebook and change it. It's going to be awesome. Then review it. And so I did. I checked out Facebook on my laptop, and then I changed it, and then I put it into the code review system, and then they reviewed it, and they shipped it. And I updated Facebook. And I'd been there like 2 hours, and I was a consultant. And that's madness. Yeah. And that wasn't because they trusted me, right? It was because they trusted Phil Dibowitz, and they trusted those guys. And those dudes very much were like, and now you will delete Facebook, right? Like there was no opportunity there for me to do anything nefarious, right? But how many enterprises would stop you from that conversation, right? And that's the transition they have to go through. And when you think about like those silos and those skill sets and those sorts of things, what changes is that as that velocity goes up, in order for the system to remain operable, both the technology systems and the people systems, that level of trust must increase. Because if it doesn't, what you'll do is have a very high velocity pipeline to catastrophic failure that you're incredibly slow to recover from. And it's a bummer. And so they go really naturally together.
Okay. So on the other hand, you guys also introduced things around compliance, things like that into your system. It's obviously that you didn't do that for the startup world.
Yes.
You did?
No, we didn't. Of course not. Yeah, they don't have compliance problems, yeah.
But so, is there a general pattern there that you then can bring back to, let's say, the startup world to also be able to help them, let's say, review and do things like that? Yeah,
I think so. I think that primitives approach to saying that what you do is build software primitives that people build on. Like there's compliance primitives. Like there's analytics primitives. There's data that needs to flow across a pipeline. You need to be able to apply rules to those things. Those rules have interesting outputs, right? And when you think about the system in that way, like that you're building it toward a compliance solution where you can say, look, if these pieces of the infrastructure have done what they said they would do in X amount of recent time, then you're compliant against some line item of an audit, which is great. Startups, though, it's similarly useful to just know like what's going on and how useful was it. And so it's the same primitive. It's just adding that extra layer on top of it that's like, okay, now you're going to use this primitive and you're going to align what's happening naturally with these other business outcomes that you can describe over here. And it's that marrying up of sort of what the business outcomes are and what the work is that's going into it that's a little tricky, but that's where you think about compliance. Does that make sense?
Given that we're almost out of time, so let's go back to the business side of things. How many salespeople do you have?
How many salespeople do we have? 15 or 20?
Okay, so let's say compared to engineers, what's the balance?
Oh, yeah, the balance is pretty engineering.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's probably 50 engineers, right? And there, I mean, there's plenty of sales folks.
When did you start realizing that you had to hire salespeople?
As soon as you needed money. Yeah, I was great at selling the software. I was bad at extracting money for it. Yeah, that was fast. Get salespeople super quick and then love them.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for being on stage here
and
actually
pleasure.
Talking in depth about this. And thanks. Cheers. So Next one on stage will be Dan Wagner from Civics Analytics.
Hello,
Dan,
how
pleasure
are you?
meeting you again.
Pleasure to meet you as well.
The one thing is that you look very different from Harper Reed.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever met Harper, but if you don't know, then you don't get the joke. Yes.
Some people say I look like a poor man's version of Bill Gates. But
okay. Oh.
It's fine.
Your claim to fame, or at least where we all know you from, is being part of the Obama campaign,
yes.
2012, where analytics played an enormous important role. After that, you started Civics Analytics. So. Yep. Give us a quick rundown of what you guys do.
Sure. So generally what we do is we're a data science advisory and technology firm. We're located in Chicago, Illinois. And what we do is we create data science technologies that help companies, nonprofits, and also political campaigns essentially make better, more data-driven decisions. I mean, as we were in the Obama campaign, we kind of like transitioned out, but you talk to CEOs, CFOs, anybody, and they're kind of faced with this kind of deluge of information that's largely kind of sitting inundated in their basements. And at the same time, they're trying to make a bunch of important decisions about where they're spending their resources, how they're placing their stores, whether or not they're going to manage employee productivity in this way or that way. And they're all looking to use data to help them do it. And what we do is essentially using AWS to architect that data in a way to help them make those decisions more effectively.
So, do you actually build stuff?
We do.
We do.
We do.
It's not just that you're a consulting firm
Yes.
and helping, because there's a number of companies out there, especially, recently the data scientist job has been described as the most sexiest job that you can have at this moment.
Oh, I didn't get that memo, but yes.
I'll remember who said it, but it appeared on the front page of one of the magazines or something like that.
Okay.
But you're not just a consulting firm so
Correct.
Tell us a bit about the kind of things that you build.
Yeah, so I mean, we immediately left the campaign, and the kind of lights went off, the curtains came down, and we were basically 15 kids clutching our Macs walking down the street. And we began to get introduced to these companies, and they all kind of had the same kind of generic set of problems, which is they have this vast IT implementation over here, which in some cases in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and then you have the decision-making apparatus of a company over here that's largely powered by spreadsheets and conditional formatting, and then there's this kind of like huge distance between those two different things. And so as we began to get introduced to these companies, they began to say, well, how do we kind of apply the same type of expertise that you had in your company? An advantage was a college president approached us and he said, we are dealing with 40% attrition over 4 years of kids that are dropping out. And these is pretty normal across tier 2 colleges and below. And what they said was, how can we basically figure out who these kids are ahead of time, build a predictive model that might say who they are, and then build intervention programs that might say what it is. The exercise, though, in terms of the data goes beyond just the prediction. You have to pull it into one central place. You have to clean it. You have to impute for missing values. You have to crunch all the records together to get a better understanding of who the kids are. You have to match all the databases using record linkage from different spots. Then you have to run a linear or nonlinear algorithm to predict who might drop out in the future, validate it on data, score the data set, provide it back to the university, run the intervention, and see what happens. That is software, right? But you can't do a lot of that stuff with a lot of the on-premise IT stuff that exists at big organizations right now, that they don't have the capabilities to do it. So as we started to have more of these conversations, we essentially began by basically implementing some basic ETL software, pulling the data into Redshift, aggregating the data, running some basic linear models to help these things, and then over time we began to add more functionality, which continually has progressed into more of a platform that we can make available to these companies.
So there is actually quite a big part, at least in this example, of machine learning in there, instead of what I would otherwise call sort of the backwards looking analytics, which is just report generation over what happened in the past.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
How much machine learning plays a role in the kind of things that you guys do?
I would say a lot. So I'll give you an example of, and the value of what AWS does is it allows us to take computationally intensive algorithms and machine learning and give those over to small organizations. So we were working with a political client this year, and they began with kind of 2 basic Redshift nodes. They ended the cycle with 32 Redshift nodes. But at some point, we decided that we were trying to figure out something called a heterogeneous treatment effect. And what that means is you run a big experiment, you have a treatment group and a control group, and traditionally you would look at just kind of the mean differences between the two groups. But if you have a lot of descriptive characteristics about the people in those two lists, you can see what type of subgroups are actually different after the treatment, as opposed to just the mean difference. You can see who's actually more treatment responsive by running a model. Traditionally, you'd run two linear models and you'd compare them against each other, but that's not going to give you a very good answer. But if your infrastructure is small, that's kind of the only option that you have. So with this organization, what we could do is we essentially spun up 200 nodes, and using Elastic MapReduce, we were able to essentially run a decision tree algorithm that's very computationally intensive. And using spot pricing, we paid like $1,200. And with that, we were basically able to offer them machine learning for a very cheap price, which traditionally has only been something that very big organizations have been able to do. But with this, both very intense data complexity and very computationally expensive, we can then give it to these people as a service.
So a lot of your customers are, as you said, are in the non-profit or in the government space.
A lot of them, yes.
Yeah. So is there if you do business with them, is that doing business at a very different level than, let's say, doing business with more commercial operations?
In some ways, it's different. It's different in the sense that the money you charge is different, but a lot of their organizational challenges are the same, which is they wake up in the morning, they have a lot of anxiety, they're trying to figure out stuff, and they've been dealing with this challenge, which is I have all this data, I'm trying to make these choices, and there's just this persistent disconnect between those two different things. And so in the case of the college example, which is they're trying to reduce churn, in some ways is computationally and statistically analogous to a telecommunications firm that's trying to reduce churn of people who are bailing on their phone plans. And so from our perspective, from data science, we can actually essentially kind of mirror those as two analogous problems, which is I have a group of people that I want to take some behavior over here. I want to have some group of people that I want to take some behavior over here, and I will essentially see what type of algorithms might be consistent between those two different kind of objects. But the motivations in one case is one organization might be a little bit more long-term and not have financial interests. They might have kind of just social interests that you can measure equally well.
So you took funding?
We did.
So
yeah, not traditional funding.
Erik Smit, or at least his investment firm did that. So how did you get that done?
So yeah, the story behind that is interesting. So during the 2012 campaign, our department lived in kind of this dark corner in the back where they wanted to keep us hidden from all the journalists. And Eric came by one day when we used to have this thing called Club Cluster, where every day at 4:30 we'd turn on a disco ball and then put on a remix to one of my deputies for his birthday, and we just ended up playing it every day. And he kind of came over that day, and I wasn't there, but the next day after elections was over and we had called it reasonably well, actually it was very precise. He said, who are you? And I was like, oh, I'm Dan, poor man's Bill Gates, hello. And he said, well, just can I talk to you later? And we met the next day, and he essentially offered me, a little bit of seed funding to keep my team together. And what we had done, obviously built a lot of insights, but we had built this incredible team of 5,000 people had applied to work for our department. We ended up hiring 30 of them based on primarily a 4-hour problem-solving mathematics exam that was very complex, but very cool, from which we kind of created this motley crew of poker players, biophysicists, child prodigies, et cetera, kind of weird combination of people who now work at Civis. And Eric offered us this funding to keep us together, and he allowed us an exploratory period to go and talk to these companies, nonprofits, governments, and kind of see what was the unifying aspect that we could provide to them.
Okay. So how is it to have Eric on your board?
Oh, it's great. Yeah, he's been both incredibly generous in what he's done for us, but also been very generous with his time and interest in what we do. Yeah.
So how did you build the business? How did you? I mean, it's many organizations assume they have a data problem or have assumed something that they know. They must come to you with very unclear specifications about what they're looking for.
Right.
So is your secret sauce really building the software, or is the secret sauce also at the beginning going down from what your potential customers are asking you down to something that you can actually solve for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are approached probably in two ways. The first way is we have big data, give us the magic. We have big data, we have problems, give us help. And then the second case is we have a specific thing that we're trying to estimate. We need your help in essentially figuring out what type of functions are most capable of meeting the requirements that we have to estimate that problem. It's 90% A and 10% B.
So most is driven more by buzz than by sort of asking, this is a specific problem.
Yeah, I think it's more, what it is, and so I met the CEO recently, and he was very, very frustrated. And he said, look, my problem is I don't know what my problem is. I go downstairs to the IT team or the whoever team or the people who do the computer thingamajiggies, and I say, tell me, we have some, basically our competitors have dropped their prices and they're offering new services through different channels. Tell me the effect of that by sales, by region, and then give me a forecast of what that's likely to be over the next 6 months. And they say, okay, boss, we'll have that ready for you soon. A couple days go by, he doesn't get his answer, she doesn't get their answer. A couple weeks go by, she doesn't get her answer. And that problem is persistent across a lot of organizations, that the amount of time that takes to make a decision is just very, very long, and it's much longer than what he or she needs to make their choice. And so that's typically what they're presented at, is like, how can we take my data and then architect the data and then the inference architecture around the data to bring it closer to the choices that I'm trying to make. In this case, how am I reacting to price pressure from my competitors? Do I drop my prices? Do I increase my promotions? Do I whatever? So help me provide some guidance in terms of that. And a lot of that is both like the consulting and the software work is trying to, and essentially using AWS to build an architecture that gets closer to the decisions that they're trying to make.
So just like I asked before, salespersons versus the rest, tell us.
So we're a weird place, but we have three groups of people. We have software engineers, data scientists, and then what we call engagement analysts. And the engineers are traditional engineers, the data scientists write algorithms, and then the engagement team is in charge of both sales and consulting. And our sales team is probably roughly 10% to 15% of the company, and I desperately need more. Okay. So he made a good point. Like, you need salespeople when you figure out you need money, and like, yes, that is true.
I assume on the Obama team you did not have any salespeople.
No. Sales we didn't have sales. We weren't asking for money, but the challenge with data and data science and analytics is you're asking people to believe you, and you're asking them to make decisions outside of their context in a way that for many people is very uncomfortable. When you measure something for the first time, you are implicitly providing oversight over something that has never received oversight. When you're applying a new metric to something, you're applying a new structure of both influence and incentive that is new. And when you provide a new inference on something, you are essentially conditionally providing a new set of the relationship of value between an enterprise. And any time, whether you're asking for money or just getting people to believe you, you have to, it's as important in terms of how you communicate the result as opposed to just the algorithm is linear or nonlinear. So, is that it?
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, I hope,
yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Alan, we've been on stage before.
I have.
Alan. Thanks for showing up.
Yeah.
Have a seat. You must know it, eh? Imager, probably, if you've been on Reddit or anything like that.
Or the internet, in general.
Yeah? Or in general. Beyond Reddit?
Beyond Reddit.
Beyond Reddit. I think your claim to fame, in my eyes, is that you built this by yourself.
Really?
Originally, or not.
Okay.
Is that not true?
Yeah, oh no, that's absolutely true. It is a bit of an interesting story in that Imager was built off of $7. That was our initial seed funding, $7, and that was for the domain name. And that was because I was a college student at Ohio University, and that's actually interesting. $7 happened to be the same price as a large pizza back there. So it was kind of a hard choice to make. I was like, Imager or large pizza? Luckily, I chose Imager. And my dad also had a $5 a month hosting account on HostGator. And if you guys know anything about shared hosting, I'm sure you do, it's sort of like all you can eat, like you get as much bandwidth as you want, as much storage space as you want. And then in the terms of service, it says that, yeah, that's true until you start affecting other people on that shared service. So I launched Imager, and that clause happened within 3 hours. And like all of a sudden, like Imager was down, and my dad sent me this like semi-angry email that's like, we've been terminated, because I literally terminated his HostGator account because of all the usage. And so then I moved over to Media Temple because they had more capacity. That lasted for about a month. Then we moved over to, I believe, like Rapid Switch. And then that lasted for, I think, like 3 months, and then we moved again, and then finally landed on AWS, which is, I think it's like the Lamborghini of hosting services. But that's how we scaled. We started small with like a Honda Civic, and then we ended up with this Lamborghini after, maybe, I think it was about 6 months or so.
So, oh, really? That fast? So, what was your drive to success? Why was it so successful immediately?
I think it was successful immediately because it solved a problem, and it solved it really well. And it was a problem that I had. I essentially just scratched my own itch by creating Imager. And that problem was that I wanted to quickly and easily upload my image to the internet and share it out with whoever I wanted. I didn't want that image to be constrained on Facebook or with my followers. I wanted to blast it out to whatever social media site I was using or online community. So
5 billion page views?
5 billion page views and 130 million unique visitors a month.
Is it 1.5 million images a day?
Yeah, 1.5 million uploaded. However, 60 billion are viewed every month.
60 billion. Upload is free, download is not. So how do you get your customers to pay? Or do your customers pay? Or
sure.
How do you make sure that you can afford the AWS bill?
Sure, yeah, well, actually, if you could help me out with that, I would really appreciate that.
No, actually, so bandwidth for many of our customers is a substantial part of their bill. So, it's...
Yeah, it's huge. So we do have a premium hosting feature. It's like $3 a month. But that's not really the bulk of our revenue. That I view that as sort of this thing that you can officially donate to the service because you like it a lot.
It's a bit like do you know Twitch?
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So Twitch also has a premium account, but you get nothing for it. You just get a badge that says you're a premium
user.
You
know what? I love that model because
lots of people using it.
Both Twitch and Imager are similar in that they have communities and they have really active people in those communities, and they call themselves Imagerians. So they want to help out. They want to support Imager. But of course, that's a really small part of our revenue. We make most of our revenue through advertising. Okay. And so every time you view an image, we show just one ad on the page.
Okay. And who's your image? Who's your ad provider? Did you pick just one, or did you use multiple?
The advertising agency or
you have an agency
platform, the advertising world is sort of this crazy spider web of like middlemen. Between like the advertiser and the publisher. But really the future of advertising, I believe, is with native or sponsored advertising. Okay. So we are working with brands to actually create content for them. Okay. We essentially act as an agency creating content for the brands to be used on Imager.com. And that works extremely well because we are able to create content that the community really likes. And then it actually turns out that brands really do want to do the right thing. They just don't necessarily know how. So we give them the guidance and actually create that content for them and then advertise it on our own platform. Okay.
What was the impact of GIFs on
Imager? Yeah.
Or basically you guys were the driver for much of the popularity of GIFs, isn't it?
Yeah, GIFs are amazing.
Or animated GIFs. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Any major GIFs?
Animated GIFs.
Right, of course, yeah.
Not regular GIFs, but
sure. Well, the animated GIFs are the most interesting. But they're really cool in that they've been around since 1989. Yeah. We're not even created for the purpose of animation, and that's sort of like in a footnote at the bottom of the spec. It's like, by the way, you can use this for animation, and of course, that's the primary use case now. Yeah. So people have found out that they can say more with an animated GIF than they can through any other means. Okay. They can literally express themselves better with a little animated GIF than they can otherwise. And so Imager gives them the means to do so. They upload their GIF through Imager, and then they can spread it out. Do you give them
tools to create as well?
We are working on that, actually.
Okay.
We currently give them tools to share. Okay. And so we just recently announced this thing that we call Project GIF-V, which turns very large GIFs into extremely small video files. And one thing, like GIFs are amazing in that they are essentially like the best part of a joke, looping over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. You don't have to wait for this thing to buffer and to load, and several minutes in, you finally get it. You get it immediately, and it brings upon this instant gratification effect, which I really, really like. And so that's what's unique about GIFs. What sucks about GIFs is that they can be huge. A GIF that is maybe 30 seconds long could easily be like 50 megabytes in size. And so with Project GIF-V, you can upload your GIF, and then it essentially converts it to this format that is for moving, like videos. Yeah.
Yeah. So you recently added tagging.
Yep.
How important is that?
Tagging is really, really important, like strategically, because we want to be able to deliver the right content to the right people. And I think one of the most unique things about Imager, and something that the internet needs more of, is actually, I think the internet was built upon this, but it's the feeling of serendipity, in that you're browsing the internet and you discover something that you didn't know you liked, but you're glad you found it. And Imager gives you that experience. When you go on to Imager.com, you just click on a picture and you start browsing, you don't really know what you're going to see, but you find essentially these little things that you're really glad you found, and it's this instant gratification effect again, and then you move on and you find the next one, you move on and you find the next one, and then pretty soon you lift your head up and like an hour has gone by and you're like late for all your meetings and everything. And so that's what's really cool about Imager, and tags are really important in that because they actually allow you to filter out things that you know you don't like. Like personally, I'm not too into politics, so I browse Imager without that. And they also allow you to do the opposite of, I'm also an avid video game player. And so I like to stay up to date with the video game industry through images. I think images are really great for visual communication. Mm-hmm. And so I can just browse the internet's greatest video game images on Imager.
The same thing goes for collections. Mm-hmm. Why did you, I can understand why you did that, but so each of these things are driven by sort of what the community asks you for as well?
Yeah.
Or,
yeah,
so does that same goes for the meme generator?
Sure. That's an interesting point. We build Imager primarily based off of what the users want and the users like. And the meme generator, for example, is a really interesting story in that the primary meme generator for Reddit was found essentially breaking the rules, and they were banned site-wide from Reddit. And now there's like this black hole that people don't know where to go to create their memes anymore. And so we pulled an all-nighter and built the meme generator in something like 36 hours and then launched it to like fill that void. But we did that just based off of user interest. They needed a place to be able to do this. And that's what Imager is all about. It's built off of that initial problem. And that's why it was successful.
Yeah. You also provide an API.
Yes.
So how hard was it to build the API and to manage the API? Because that's something very different from web page loading versus just programmatic access to you.
Yeah. APIs are interesting in that you can't necessarily release fast and iterate like you can with everything else.
No, because an API is forever.
Yeah, when you release an API, it's like there for like 10 years.
Yeah, because everybody starts using it immediately.
Right. So that's just sort of a different release strategy that we've had to get used to. So now we've versioned them.
Okay.
Yeah.
You took investment.
We did.
At one moment. Can you tell us why you did that? Or?
Yeah. Imager was bootstrapped and profitable for the first 5 years, and that allowed us to really find product market fit. We knew that it was a really great product that people wanted and used. It also allowed us to build into the company culture this sense of being really thoughtful about where we're spending our resources.
Scrappy.
Yeah, yes, or scrappy,
Frugal,
sure.
sorry,
Sure, I
frugal.
prefer thoughtful.
Frugal.
And VC funding is like jet fuel. It accelerates everything you do, but before you light that match, you should really know where you're going. And so being bootstrapped allowed us to do that. And now we essentially are that rocket ship to the moon right now.
Okay.
And we're in this like hyper growth period because of it.
So you were able to hire more engineers.
Yeah.
Things like that. How big are you now?
Yeah. So we raised funding, I believe, 6 months ago, and we were 13 people when that happened. And now we are 32.
Oh.
So we more than doubled in 6 months.
So the same question as well to you. How many salespeople do you have?
We have one.
Okay.
One. But I can keep on repeating this. It's like they're absolutely right. You raise or you find salespeople when you need money. We were fortunate in that we had an ad guy on from the very beginning who could sort of tweak the knobs and get the right CPMs in the right places. Not necessarily a sales guy, but just somebody who could optimize the programmatic revenue. And now that we are doing native advertising and we're working directly with the brands, we are focusing a lot on bringing on a sales force.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank
Great
you.
conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks to be on stage here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Thank our founders for actually making the time and come here and talk to us on stage. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I certainly did. I thought they were great conversations. I didn't know where this was going to go beforehand, but I thought they were great, each and every one of them. In 15 minutes, I believe, we'll be back here on stage for having a conversation with CTOs to CTOs. So hang around if you want to, or there's other sessions interesting as well. Thank you.